campaign to oust the dictatorship of President Samuel Doe effectively triggered a war that brought the almost complete destruction of Africa's oldest republic. Charles Taylor, the leader of the NPFL, was a relatively obscure figure at the time, but he was to become West Africa's most notorious warlord. He had the singular honor of starting a bloody civil war on Christmas Eve of 1989 and subsequently winning both the presidential and parliamentary vote in an election that was declared free and fair by the international community. Charles Taylor's story involves power, conflict, and a legacy that has had an indelible impact not just on Liberia but on the entire West African region. To appreciate the dynamics of Charles Taylor's paradoxical transformation, one must trace his rebellious career both as a student activist and then in national politics. Charles MacArthur Gankay Taylor was born on January 28, 1948 in the Monserrado settlement of Arthington, one of the established settler communities along the St. Paul River near Monrovia. He was raised in a family that had a mix of native Liberian and Americo-Liberian heritage. As for Liberia, it was founded as a colony by the American Colonization Society in 1822. The society believed that African Americans would have better opportunities for freedom and prosperity in Africa, so they arranged for the transportation of freed African Americans to the colony. The settlers eventually declared independence on July 26, 1847, creating the Republic of Liberia. Despite their origins, the settlers, or the Americo-Liberians as they are called, maintained a system of inequality, often treating the native population as second-class citizens. This contributed to the long-standing tensions between different ethnic groups in the country. The Americo-Liberians constituted less than 2% of Liberia's population, but in the 19th and early 20th century, they made up nearly 100% of qualified voters. The dominant political party was the Americo-Liberian True Whig Party, the TWP. Founded in the 19th century, the TWP's grip on Liberian politics was undeniable. Every Liberian president hailed from this party, making it one of the world's longest-reigning political entities. Charles Taylor's father, Nelson, worked as a teacher, lawyer, and a judge and was an Americo-Liberian. His mother, Zoe, was a native Gola tribeswoman. The family was neither extremely poor nor exceptionally wealthy, providing the young Charles with a somewhat middle-class upbringing. His early life was marked by a keen interest in education, and he was noted to be quite ambitious from a very young age. When Charles Taylor reached the age of 13, he moved to a missionary Baptist school called the Ricks Institute. Ricks Institute was one of the most prestigious high schools in Liberia, where most of the other students were from the affluent Monrovian Americo-Liberian families. But as a youth, Charles Taylor began to prove as unruly as he was industrious in the classroom, and he soon got a bad name with the teaching staff. In one peculiar incident, he responded to a reprimand by baring his buttocks in the middle of class and shortly afterwards urinating in the schoolyard as well. It was not long before cheeky young Charles Taylor was expelled from Ricks Institute. Nevertheless, through his own efforts, Teachers Training Institute wished students to finish their high school education while at the same time training as teachers. Finally, after qualifying at the age of 19, Charles Taylor set out to tackle his first job of adulthood, which was teaching science and mathematics in Bomi County. In 1968, Taylor returned to Arthington, where he continued teaching mathematics and science courses. However, the life at Arthington was too restrictive for the now 20-year-old Charles, who was by now eager for a real advancement in life. So in this regard, Charles Taylor moved to Monrovia and continued teaching, and soon things began to move into a higher gear and new horizons opened up. In 1971, following the death of President William Tubman, the incoming President William Tauber's regime launched an initiative to improve standards at the Finance Ministry, and so they instituted an open examination to recruit new talent. Charles Taylor scored well enough in this examination to be offered a job as a full-time junior accountant in William Tauber's Ministry of Finance. A life-changing moment occurred which set Charles on a new path and probably altered the course of his life. In this instance, he had a girlfriend taken away from him by one of his old friends from Rick's Institute, who had just come back from the United States with a master's degree. Now, because of this ordeal, Taylor began the process to speed his travel to the United States for further studies. And so in 1972, Charles Taylor was on his way to the United States to further his studies. The first stop for Charles was Chamberlain Junior College, which at the time was mostly a school for aspiring fashion designers and was popular with girls from the local Boston society. In some ways, this suited Charles Taylor just fine. Afterwards, he enrolled at Bentley College in Massachusetts, majoring in economics. Beyond academics, this period of Charles Taylor's life was also a time of political awakening. He joined the Union of Liberian Associations in the Americas, the ULAA, an umbrella organization representing some 35,000 Liberian students and other immigrants living in the United States, becoming the chairman of its board of directors. Characteristic of the later insurgent movement, of which he consequently became leader, Charles Taylor was one of a few Americo-Liberians among an otherwise predominantly indigenous association. During this time, his exposure to both Western education and the political ideologies of the time began shaping Charles Taylor's aspirations for Liberia, a nation that was experiencing its own set of challenges during the 1970s, such as political instability and social inequality. The new president of Liberia, William Tolbert, had tried to bridge the gap between Americo-Liberians and the indigenous tribal peoples of Liberia. President Tolbert stressed the importance of efficiency and initiated programs to help the poor. At the same time, however, his regime was also notorious for corruption and nepotism, which led to frustration and anger within the country. Charles Taylor soon developed a reputation as an outspoken critic of President William Tolbert. In 1979, during President Tolbert's visit to New York, Taylor led a noisy demonstration outside the Liberian mission to the United Nations. Now, rather than ignore the protesters, President Tolbert engaged Taylor in a bantering debate. And this war ordeal had the unintended consequence of instantly enhancing Charles Taylor's stature and reputation, earning him admirers both in the United States as well as in Liberia. This protest that Charles Taylor had led in New York was by no means the only display of Taylor's anti-Tolbert disobedience. At the time of the rice riots in Liberia, Charles Taylor had reportedly advocated buying arms and storming the Liberian embassy. These events in the late 1970s marked the first steps on a path to power for Charles Taylor, which would increasingly be characterized by assertiveness as well as brute force, and which would blend the power of his natural popularity with a more ruthless approach to achieve his goals. In February 1980, the elderly President Tolbert invited Taylor and other ULAA delegates to come home to Liberia and lend their skills and education to the country. President Tolbert invited the young upstarts to advise him how to bring about the reforms within the country, which he said he was sincerely trying to achieve. The president also committed to paying their expenses in Monrovia as well. Charles Taylor returned to Monrovia on the eve of events that would change Liberia as well as his own personal fortunes. The Liberia he found upon his return was rife with rumors and political dissent, with an all-pervasive mood of impending change. This change happened on April 12, 1980. On this day, President William Tolbert was murdered during a military coup headed by Master Sergeant Samuel Doe, who belonged to a Liberian native tribe. Following this coup, months of bloody retribution by indigenous Liberians against Americo-Liberians ensued, resulting in the overthrow of the long-dominant True Whig Party, the TWP. The Liberian people celebrated the coup d'etat as liberation from Americo-Liberian domination. Major Thomas Kuempa, who was seen as Samuel Doe's right-hand man, along with others, helped stage this coup that took out the TWP and William Tolbert. In the aftermath of this bloody coup, Charles Taylor exploited his marriage to his first wife, Tupi Taylor, the niece of Major Thomas Kuempa, who was then the Army Chief of Staff, to secure an appointment as the Director General of the General Services Agency, the GSA, the Government of Liberia's procurement agency. This post in the GSA was a lucrative one for Charles Taylor, and it enabled him to amass a personal fortune by taking commissions on each contract he arranged. It is widely believed that the contacts Charles Taylor established during the performance of his duties in the GSA helped him during his recruitment drive and his later search for finances and weapons. Anyways, Charles Taylor was later replaced as head of the GSA in November of 1983 and eventually demoted to the position of Deputy Minister of Commerce. However, when he was accused of diverting almost $1 million in public funds to a private account, Taylor fled Liberia and apparently entered the United States sometime in late 1983, only to be arrested and imprisoned, awaiting extradition to Liberia after a request from the government of the now president, Samuel Doe. When a federal court ruled that sufficient evidence existed to support the Liberian government's request for his return, Charles Taylor escaped from the Plymouth House of Corrections in the United States where he was being held. As one version of the story goes, Charles Taylor convinced a guard to bend the rules at the facility to allow him to pass from the North Wing where he was being held to the East Wing, telling the guard he wanted to play cards with a friend. Once he was there, he used a hacksaw blade to cut through an iron window bar, and using bed sheets tied together, he and 4 other inmates climbed down from the second floor, scaled a fence, and ran into the nearby woods. Meanwhile, President Samuel Doe's dictatorial regime proved no better for the Liberian people than its predecessor. After a coup attempt against him in 1985, led by Major Thomas Kuampa, failed, Samuel Doe responded with brutal atrocities against suspected conspirators and their followers. The president retaliated against tribes such as the Gio and the Mano in the north, where most of the coup plotters had come from, particularly in Nimba County in the northeast of Liberia. Some Liberian northerners fled brutal treatment from the Liberian army into the Ivory Coast. The exact time and detail of Charles Taylor's escape from prison in the United States and arrival in West Africa remains controversial. What is known for certain is that when Charles Taylor arrived in West Africa sometime between November 1985 and April of 1986, he went on an extensive tour of the sub-region seeking support to overthrow the Doe regime. Burkina Faso, Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana and Libya are believed to have extended diverse kinds of patronage ranging from finance, training grounds, and the supply of traveling documents reasons for detesting Samuel Doe's regime. Charles Taylor's other main regional supporter was Burkina Faso's leader, Blaise Compaoré, who had seized power in 1987, allegedly with the help of a squad of Liberian exiles. Blaise Compaoré provided Charles Taylor with a training base and arms supplies and loaned him some other regular soldiers. Charles Taylor's forces also included a number of dissidents from Sierra Leone, Nigeria, Ghana, and the Gambia. Controversy surrounds the issue of why and how Charles Taylor became the leader of these exiled Liberian opposition groups. One school of thought argues that with his knowledge of procurement procedures and his extensive contacts, Taylor was seen by the exiled Liberian opposition groups as a good choice. With the leadership question resolved and political support secured, Charles Taylor eventually led these men, who now comprise the National Patriotic Front of Liberia, into Libya, where they were trained in guerrilla tactics and the use of weapons at the Wheeler base in Tajura and also at the Mataba base outside Tripoli, Libya's capital. During this time, Libya under Muammar Gaddafi was always looking for ways to undermine pro-American regimes, of which Samuel Doe's regime in Liberia was pro-American. After several false starts, Charles Taylor was ready by late 1989 to launch his rebellion. His NPFL insurgents, numbering about 150, invaded Nimba County, an area occupied by the Gio and Mano tribesmen who had suffered terrible repression in the wake of the